Most online business owners I meet, their lead magnets are not very good. And they're leaving a lot of money and clients and income on the table because of it. So I want to help you solve that problem in this episode here. I'm going to be sharing with you the biggest secrets to creating a lead magnet that generates qualified leads consistently. Let's get into it. First thing I want to share with you is why you actually need a lead magnet. There's a lot of people, maybe don't think about this, or I see a lot, like sometimes I'll go on people's websites and they're like, sign up for my newsletter. And the newsletter is basically the lead magnet. And the first thing just to remember is like, nobody wants to sign up for a newsletter. I don't know about you, but I am inundated with emails. Like I'm trying to unsubscribe to every newsletter that I end up on. And so when it comes to getting people on your list and getting people into your audience, rather than just saying, hey, join my email list, or hey, follow me, you're going to be much more effective if you have something that you can give someone that is valuable in exchange for them joining and becoming part of your audience. It's just going to be so much more effective. Like as an example, when I was, and we'll do this too, when we end up building out your Facebook groups, when I first started with my Facebook group, the first 200 people into my Facebook group, what I would do every day is I would just go and DM people. And I just did a lot of outreach, both to my audience as well as just cold like coaches online. And whenever I would invite somebody to join my Facebook group, I wouldn't say, come join my Facebook group. I would say, hey, I've got this really awesome free training inside my Facebook group on how to get, 2 to 4 clients per month. Do you want to check that out? Like, is that something you'd find valuable? And then if they said yes, I'd be like, cool, what's actually inside the Facebook group? Like, here's a link. And so that approach of having something that's valuable and using that as almost like bait. You think of like if you go out, fishing. I'm not a fisher personally, but my mom's boyfriend is a big fly fisher, and he's got I go into his office. He's got 50 different kinds of bait. It's crazy. I had no idea there were so many different kinds of bait. He's got 12 different fishing rods. It's crazy. But you got to use the right bait to catch the right fish, right? It's the same thing. And so lead magnet is basically like the bait. You put that on the end of the fishing rod, you dangle it out into the world, and that bait is going to be the thing that we use to bring the right people into your audience. And so that is really what a lead magnet is about, and why it's so important, and why it's going to be so much more effective than just having a join my email list, or come, follow me on Facebook or Instagram or something like that. Anybody have any questions about that? That makes sense? Cool. Okay, let's move on. So, checklist for a successful lead magnet. I think there's not a right or wrong in terms of what a lead magnet looks like. There are lots of different options in terms of building out your lead magnet. We're going to focus a little bit more on guides because I think that's one of the best formats. We'll talk about that in a bit. But really, if we zoom out one step from that and ask ourselves, what is a successful lead magnet? How do you know whether or not you have a lead magnet that's successful? There's a couple of things that really successful lead magnets do. And this is your North Star, this checklist here. So when you're building out your lead magnet, I want you to make sure that you're checking these boxes here on the screen. And that will make sure that we ultimately create a lead magnet that's going to be successful for you and your business. The first thing a successful lead magnet does is it attracts the right people, and also, equally important, repels the wrong ones. So just like we think about, the bait on the end of a fishing rod, you got to have the right bait in order to catch the right fish, right? If we have the wrong bait, the fish that we might want to catch aren't going to be interested. So it's got to be something that your ideal clients, people who are in your niche, the people that ultimately you're going to want to work with, see and go, yes, that is something that I find valuable. That's something that I want. And equally important, the people who aren't in your niche, or the people who maybe are somewhat in your niche, but don't really have all the qualities that they need in order to be a good fit to work with you, are going to see that. And they're going to be like, this doesn't really appeal to me. So as an example, one of my lead magnets, and we're kind of honestly in a little bit of a pivot right now, in my coaching business. Initially, most of our business was focused 99% on helping new coaches. And so my first lead magnet was a guide that was how to sign 2 to 4 new coaching clients per month. And when you think about that, you're like, okay, well, if I'm a new coach, I'm just getting started. 2 to 4 new clients seems like a pretty like doable goal. Like it feels realistic to me. It doesn't feel like a massive stretch versus if I'm a coach who's already making like 10 grand a month and signing like 6 clients a month or whatever it is, I'm going to see that and I'm going to go, oh, that's not for me. Like this is not where I'm at. I'm far beyond this at this point. So just that positioning, like really like that for me, that 2 to 4 new clients per month in that case allowed me to really laser in and focus on like, this is something that new coaches are going to find attractive and more experienced coaches who aren't really in my niche are probably not going to be interested in. So that's an example of just positioning a lead magnet in a way where you can start to think about like, okay, how do I call the right people in? And also how do I repel the people who are not going to be interested in ultimately working with me and just aren't going to be a good fit for what I do. So that's the first thing. Successful lead magnets attract the right people and repel the wrong ones. Next thing we want to look at is this lead magnet has to be worth more than what you're asking for. Whenever I describe, marketing, one of the things I talk about is like marketing it's like whenever you're asking someone to do something, you can kind of think of it like there's a scale. There's like, you imagine like those scales where, you've got the two, plates on one side, you can kind of put something on another side, you can put something else and they can kind of even out like one of those scales. If you think about like whenever you're asking someone to do something on one side of the scale, it's what are they going to get from doing that thing? And on the other side, it's what are you asking for them in return? So in this case, you're not asking for someone's money. The lead magnet is free, but you're asking for number one, their personal information, which is their name and email address, which is a pretty big ask these days. Like most people don't want to give out their email addresses willy-nilly, like for no reason, because they're afraid, they're going to get spammed and they're going to just end up with a bunch of junk in their mailbox. So that is an ask. And also you're asking for their time because it's going to take them a certain amount of time to just check out your lead magnet. And so there is a certain level of commitment there. And on the other hand, it's what are you giving them in return for that exchange? And someone has to feel like what they're getting is more valuable than what you're asking for in order for them to do it. And that principle applies to whenever you're asking someone to do anything. That balance always has to be in place. If the balance is off, if somebody doesn't feel like what they're going to get is worth what they're being asked to give, then they won't do it. So it seems simple and obvious, but I think a lot of people forget about this. And what this means is that your lead magnet has to be super valuable. And it has to be more valuable than, someone's email address and their first name and whatever amount of time you're asking of them for them to actually go through this. So super important. So that's number 2. Number 3, we talked about this idea of delivering value. So this is something that someone has to perceive in your niche, has to perceive as valuable. Super important. And also that you end up delivering on what you've promised. So if you oversell the lead magnet on the front end and someone ends up getting the lead magnet and they're like, oh, this sucks. Like this isn't anything like what they talked about. Or, you don't fulfill on that promise, then you've completely tarnished like all of the trust in that relationship basically from day one. It's kind of like the analogy would be, if you were, dating and maybe you put like a really nice profile picture on some dating app and maybe it was someone completely different and the person saw you and they're like, wow, you're really hot. Like then you ended up on a date with them and you go on a date and you're like, you don't look anything like your profile. Like this is a completely different person. So that would be a big violation of trust. And the same thing happens quite often in marketing where it's like, we'll maybe overpromise something and then someone gets the thing and it's like, there's a letdown. Really great way to completely, tarnish that relationship just in the first interaction. So what you want is for someone to walk away from this experience feeling like, wow, this person like delivered something that was really valuable to me. And there's trust that's built through that process, just through them basically exchanging their information for something where you've made them a promise and then you fulfill on that promise. That instantly builds trust. And trust is super important. And it's in very short supply these days. Most people are just inherently mistrustful of anything online, especially stuff that they see on ads. So super important that your lead magnet is valuable and that it delivers on whatever it is that you're promising. Also, good lead magnets position you as an expert that they need to keep paying attention to or want to keep paying attention to. So someone ideally is going to walk away from consuming your lead magnet with a sense of like, wow, Renee is really amazing at what she does. Like she has an awesome just background and experience, and she really has a lot of knowledge and expertise and wisdom to share in this area that I need help with. I feel like I got a lot of value from this guide or whatever it is. Like I need to keep paying attention to her because she's clearly got more to share with me that will make my life better. So that's super important that someone feels like walking away from this experience that you are an expert. Also, you want to leave them wanting more. So I think of like a lead magnet, like a really good first date. Really good first date. You know, you've got like a lot of fun. You had like a nice interaction. There was, you know, enough of a connection there that you're like, wow, this person's interesting. You're intrigued, but you're not like dumping like all of your life story on them. You're not like dragging them into the weeds about like the terrible thing that happened to you in your childhood when you were 4. You're not like that stuff. You go like date 10, you do that stuff. But on date 1, it's just like a lighthearted kind of valuable interaction that leaves somebody walking away from that feeling like, wow, that I want to do that again. Like that is the feeling that you want to leave someone with. They're like, wow, this is helpful. This was useful and I want more. So we don't need to go like super, super, super deep on lead magnets. It's more just like, this is like your first date kind of way of thinking about it. And then finally, at the end of your lead magnet, we want to invite people to take appropriate next steps. So if they're, you know, at the end of your lead magnet and they want more, where do they go? What do they do to deepen that relationship with you? There's going to be a number of people who want to take some kind of next step. And so we need to figure out what those appropriate next steps are. We'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of our training today in terms of invitations for lead magnets, because there's a lot that I've learned about like what to put in a lead magnet in terms of invitations and what not to put in a lead magnet. And it's important that we have the appropriate next steps in your lead magnet so that you can deepen the relationship with people who are going to want to learn more about you and get more value and just kind of take those next steps. So this is really your checklist and your North Star in terms of building out your lead magnet. And there are lots of different ways that your lead magnet might look, and we'll go into the details in terms of how to build these out. But as long as your lead magnet checks these boxes on this page, it's going to be successful. So keeping this in mind, you can go back to this as a kind of checklist as you're building out your lead magnet. And I will also include the slides and everything and when I upload this to the portal, so you'll have this to go back to. And this, you know, really is like your North Star as you're building your lead magnets out. So that being said, any questions you guys have before we move on? I think I can only see one of you. So if you do have any questions, you can just unmute yourself and just start talking. That would be totally fine. Hey friend, hope you're enjoying this episode of the podcast. And before we get back to it, if you're an established online business owner who's serious about unlocking your next level of income and impact and growth in your business, I want you to watch my free $1 Million online business training, where I walk through a 4-step roadmap I've personally used to sell well over $1 million of coaching, consulting, and courses online. It's going to make the journey of growing your business so much easier. I want to give this to you for free. All you got to do to access it is go to jasonmoss.com/growth. That's jasonmoss.com/GROWTH to get free access to this training right now. Now back to the episode.
Okay, so my question is, like, for my niche, there's a lot of things I can do that focus in on specific areas, but they aren't necessarily like disqualifying people, I guess, because it is pretty like general, like single women who are, you know, struggling and dating in relationships for one reason or another. And so I guess I had one idea that is like, maybe it's qualifying more of the women who have money. Like, this is just an example, like Feminine Energy 101 for the high achieving woman or something like that. Like, is that sort of, I guess, what I should lean toward?
That's a great example of how we might do this. Just looking at like what makes someone like a perfect client What are all the
Okay.
qualities and characteristics? And that includes obviously their like pain points and challenges, but also like ability to pay, what's going to make them like a good fit for coaching with you. We look at all of those things, and then we can look at, okay, how do we just position your guy, your lead magnet, and how we talk about it in a way that's going to call that person forward.
Okay.
So
That
that's a
makes
good
sense.
example, like what you just
Okay.
shared. And also, this happens not just like through the headline, but it also happens through the copy in your ads, and it happens through your landing page, and it even happens in the lead magnet itself. So you're constantly doing like that filtering out in terms of all your messaging is like, here's who this is for, here's who this is not for. That's kind of like the filtering that happens as somebody goes through this whole process.
Okay. That makes sense. Cool. Thank you.
Sure. All right, let's move on. Now, before you get started with this whole process of building your lead magnet out, everybody wants to jump to this. It's like in Coach and Launchpad. People are like, I don't want to do market research. I'm like, I get it. But here's the truth. Paid traffic, in my experience with paid traffic is, we talked about this in week 1. Paid traffic is a great amplifier. And when you've got clarity on the foundations in your business, paid traffic is like pouring gasoline on a fire. It's like things really blow up in a really beautiful, awesome way. On the flip side, paid traffic will also magnify the lack of clarity in your business. And so little, things like not, having clarity on your niche and just maybe being like 70% sure, but like not being 100% sure, like that stuff really matters when it comes to this. And this will end up costing you lots of time and lots of money not having these pieces in place. So the first thing I always do, when it comes to building out things with paid traffic, is I go back to the foundations and I ask myself, who is my niche? And Emily will tell you this because we just got on a call last week, and I'm in that same process. Every like 3 months, I go back to this and I fill out a niche worksheet again, and I get super crystal clear on like, who are my people and what have I learned up until this point? Because this, in terms of getting clear on your niche, it's an iterative process. It's like you start with something and then you end up putting yourself out there, and 6 months later, you learn new things. You learn what kind of clients you enjoy working with the most, what kinds of clients have the best results, what kinds of clients can pay you, what kinds of clients are most likely to sign up to work with you, and what kinds of clients aren't a good fit. What are all the things that you've learned about, in terms of the clients that you've worked with who maybe weren't a good fit? Why was that? And really bringing that all back into getting clearer and clearer on who that perfect person really is. Super important that we have that clarity before moving forward. Now, that being said, you're maybe not going to feel 100% certain ever. This is always an iterative process, but I want all of you here to go back to this piece first and make sure we've got that foundation in place, and we really know like, who is this for? Who are we really speaking to? So if you need some tweaks here, or if you feel like that's something that you need to do, and I would recommend all of you honestly to do this before moving forward with building your lead magnet, I am going to attach a link to a worksheet that you can fill out. And this will be in the portal after I upload this. And if you're watching in the portal, it'll probably be below this video, where you can just go through that worksheet and fill it out. And this will just be like a refresher on getting super clear on your niche. It's probably questions you've asked yourself before, but I think going through that again is super important, even if you think you know. And I just, want to just reiterate that I do this like every 3 months, I would say on average. And it's really continued to serve me and help me as I've made pivots and shifts and changes and in my own business. And I think that will really help in terms of moving forward, because everything that we do in terms of our lead magnet and our funnels and our ads really begins with knowing, who is this actually for? That's the most important question you can ask in your business. So if you need to go through that process again, and I would recommend that you do, there will be a worksheet in the portal, which I will attach, that will help you do that. And I would recommend you go through that process first. And once you actually have gone through that, you should have clarity on who your people are. And then we can move on to actually building out the lead magnet itself. First question people often ask about lead magnets is, what's the format? So what format should my lead magnet be? Lots of different right answers here. This is not about, one right answer. You can structure a lead magnet as a guide, like a short PDF or something like that. That's my favorite form of a lead magnet. I think it's just a really like easy to consume thing that is valuable, but people can like scroll through pretty quickly. And when I think about the perfect format for lead magnets, oftentimes I'm thinking about that. Like, what is a great first date piece of content? It's like, you don't want to go on like a 3-hour dinner with someone you just met online and you have no idea who they are. You want to go on like a 30-minute coffee date. And the same thing applies when it comes to lead magnets. Lead magnets are like someone's dipping their toe in the water, getting to know you a little bit. So you want something that is easy to consume, lightweight, someone's going to find valuable, and it leaves them wanting more. That is really the perfect format, kind of provides that. So guides, I think, do a really good job at that. And they're not the only format, but they're the one that I'm going to be talking about the most today. And I'm going to recommend for all of you, especially if this is your first lead magnet. Checklists can also be good. Case studies, video trainings, particularly if they're like on the shorter side, I would say like less than, 20 minutes or so. Quizzes I've seen used as lead magnets. There are probably other formats I haven't mentioned here. All of these can work well. The most important thing, again, going back to this checklist, is that your lead magnet checks these boxes. And as long as it checks these boxes, the format can be flexible. That said, if you're wanting like hey, what should I focus on first, Jason? I would recommend a guide for your first lead magnet. Now, after you choose a format, the next question you probably have is, well, what should I talk about? Like, what is the topic in terms of this lead magnet? What should the focus be? And I wanted to share 5 questions here that I think will help in terms of getting clear on what that topic actually is. So asking yourselves these questions, and I would just journal on these. I think these are really helpful questions to just ask yourself to get clear. And just going through these 5 questions will probably give you, I don't know, at least a dozen potential ideas for topics that you can choose for your lead magnet. The first question, probably the most important question, is what's your niche's number one biggest problem? So as an example, when I did my market research and I got on calls with coaches, 8 out of 10 coaches told me their biggest problem was getting clients. So I was like, okay, well, my first lead magnet needs to be a client attraction guide. That was pretty obvious for me. So, one of the biggest things you can do is just ask yourself that question. And generally, lead magnets, they're focused on helping people in your niche solve their number one biggest problem. Those are going to be the things that are going to be most attractive. And they're also going to do a really good job calling in the right people, right? Because we know that people who are going to be interested in that lead magnet are going to be people who have that problem, so that's a great way of attracting the right people through focusing on that core problem or core pain point that your niche really has. So that's number one. Another question you could ask is maybe less focused on the problem or the pain point, more focused on the desire. Like, what does your niche really want? So for example, like we're running a masterclass next month. I think it's going to be called 10K months, because so many coaches, I get on sales calls with them and they're like, I'm like, what do you really want? What's your goal as a coach? And they're like, I want to make 10K a month, like consistently. Like, great. Okay. Well, I know what I'm going to do for my masterclass. So same thing, with your niche. It's like, what is that core desire? What is that thing that people really want? And building that guide or building that lead magnet around that core desire can be a really powerful way of drawing the right people in as well. Another question you could ask yourself to inspire potential ideas for topics: what's the first step your niche needs to take to get closer to their ultimate goal? So if we look at the journey that your niche takes from where they are today to ultimately where they want to be, that journey is probably comprised of like a series of steps. And it's not like one step just takes them all the way to the destination. There's probably a number of different steps they need to take in order to reach that goal. So if we just look at like, what is that first step that someone needs to take? That's not going to get them all the way to the goal, but it's going to get them one step closer. As an example, if I look at my niche, helping coaches, the first thing that coaches need to do if they want to start getting clients is get clear on who their ideal clients actually are, get clear on their niche, right? So an example of a really good potential lead magnet for me might be, like a find your niche guide, like a guide that was designed to help coaches get clear on their niche. And so I can attract people who are interested in ultimately getting clients and who want to take that next step. And they know that first step is, okay, I just need to figure out like who my ideal clients actually are. Honestly, as I'm talking about that, I'm like, that's something that we should put together. That's a really good lead magnet for us. That'd probably work really well. So what is that first step for your ideal clients? And that might inspire some ideas. Also, you could ask yourself, what are your niche's biggest unanswered questions? What are the questions that they have that might be things that they're thinking about, that they're wondering about, that they're unsure about, that you could potentially create guides around to draw those people in? So, as an example, I know a lot of new coaches are asking themselves the question, do I need to get certified to start coaching? And they're interested in starting coaching, but maybe they're unsure about whether or not they need certification first. And so just creating a certification guide for coaches, like, do you need to get certified? Here's the 5 things you should consider before you start your coaching business or something like that. I know that the people who are going to click on that are going to be the people who are serious about starting their coaching business, and they're interested in learning more about whether or not they need to get certified as a next step to do that. So this is an example of how we might be able to call those people in. So asking yourself, what are your niche's biggest unanswered questions? And then finally, just asking yourself, what will your niche find most valuable? Like, chances are you're here, all of you have been, coaching clients at this point. You probably have an intuitive sense of like, okay, for these people that I want to work with, like, what do you think they would really want? Like, what are the things that are going to be most valuable that they're going to really be interested in? And asking yourself that question. I want you to spend the next 30 seconds to a minute brainstorming 3 potential topics. Okay, so now that you hopefully have some interesting topic ideas, after going through that whole process, the next step is to turn those topics into headlines. And these would be the headlines for the lead magnets themselves. I love this quote from David Ogilvy. He is like one of the OG ad guys. I think he's got some interesting stuff. And he says here, on the average, 5 times as many people read the headline as read the body copy. When you have written your headline, you have spent 80 cents out of your dollar. Super, super important, I think, to remember that, because most people, the way that they create content and lead magnets is the same. It's like we spent all this time creating this amazing lead magnet, and then we slap the title on it almost as like an afterthought. When, in my opinion, it should be the exact opposite. Like, you should spend at least, 50% of your time coming up with a perfect headline, because the right headline makes a massive difference in terms of the number of people who are actually going to end up downloading something. And really what you have to work with when it comes to selling your guide and presenting your guide or your lead magnet is the headline. Like, that is really like what someone's going to read and decide, like, is this for me, or should I just scroll past this and go on to something else? So all that being said, super important to have really good headlines. Next step is to take those topics and to really brainstorm some headlines that you could potentially use for your lead magnet. So a couple of tips that I will share with you guys for writing headlines, and a lot of this stuff are, these are things you may be familiar with already. The first thing is, when it comes to headlines, you want to keep it simple. The best headlines are simple. They don't, pack a bunch of really high level ideas into one headline. It's like, it should be something that someone sees and understands immediately. Like our headline for our guide, how to sign 2 to 4 coaching clients every month. It's so simple and so tangible and so specific. And also, one thing that I often recommend, and this is just a good marketing principle in general, go for clear over clever. So I see a lot of coaches, like when they're creating content or they're creating like headlines for masterclasses or guides, they try to come up with something that's like it's like an innuendo, or it's like some kind of like fancy thing that like is a fancy way of saying something that like it takes someone like a couple seconds to be like, oh, I get what you mean. You don't want to do that. It like clarity comes from just having something that is like so specific and tangible that like it's immediately understood by people when they see it. That's what really good headlines do. So go for clear over clever. Also, we talked about this idea of calling out who it's for, like using the headline as a way of qualifying and also disqualifying. So going back to my example of how to sign 2 to 4 coaching clients per month, number one, it's not just how to sign 2 to 4 clients a month, because that could apply to anyone, right? It could apply to people who are running web design businesses and people who are running, all sorts of different service-based businesses who want clients. But this guide of like how to sign 2 to 4 coaching clients calls out coaches specifically. So I'm calling out my niche in the title. And also 2 to 4 clients is like speaking to a specific kind of coach, a coach who's earlier on in their journey, right? So that's one example of how you might do that. And there are lots of different ways you can do this, but using the headline as a tool to really call out your ideal client, the people that you're wanting to work with. Going back to Emily's example, that's another great way we might, do this, is calling out people who are financially qualified, high achievers, or, ambitious professionals, or something like that. Those are words that often show up in headlines as a way of calling out people who are employed and people who are, generally high achieving people, or people who are, growth oriented. They're wanting to invest in themselves. So these are words that you might see quite a bit in headlines and titles for this reason, because it does a better job calling forward those types of people who are going to be a better fit for coaching. Also, the headline needs to be something that when someone reads it, they perceive the lead magnet as valuable. And that might sound obvious, but oftentimes you'll read headlines and it's not very clear to me like what the value is here. So making sure that headline really communicates that value clearly and makes it juicy enough that someone's going to be like, yeah, like I want that. Also, something we talk about a lot in content creation is using pattern interrupts or open loops. Like when you can create a headline that opens up some kind of like gap in somebody else's mind. Like, if I say to you, like, you'll never believe what, Joey said to Rachel this Thursday, ... You're like, well, what did Joey say to Rachel? You want to know, right? There's like some curiosity that's opened up there. That's an example of an open loop. And that open loop creates tension. Like when you hear that headline, you literally, like, if you pay attention to your body, you'll notice there's a little, at least for me, when I hear that, there's a almost like a feeling of tension. There's like something's unresolved and I feel uncomfortable about that. And I want to click on this to figure out what happened as a way of alleviating that tension. This is what really good headlines do. They open that loop and they create that sense of like curiosity that makes me want to click on something in order to close that gap. So you can do this in headlines. Also, emotional headlines generally are going to be more attractive. So whenever you can make somebody feel something, rile somebody up, or make someone, feel either positive or negative emotions. You look at like most news headlines and like love it or hate it. I mean, most people don't really love scrolling through the news. And the reason for it is because it riles you up. It makes you feel something. Like headlines and news stories are designed to provoke something oftentimes in you. Like there's some sense of like anger or outrage or disgust or tension that you feel when you read certain headlines. And emotion is generally a really powerful tool that grabs our interest. We pay attention to things that are emotional for us because usually things that are emotional are things that we want to pay attention to for our survival. So we're all biologically hardwired to want to pay attention to things that make us feel fear or make us feel like there's some threat. And I'm not saying that your lead magnet has to do this, but if you look at a lot of headlines out there, there's a reason why these headlines are successful, at least at getting clicks. It's because they take advantage of these ways that we're wired as human beings. So that is a tool that you have to play with as well. And then in terms of structuring headlines, I find how-to headlines and headlines with numbers in them can often work really well. So when you can say like how to do X or 7 ways to do X, those types of headlines generally are going to be very attractive to people because they provide like a structure and a way of presenting information that just people for some reason generally tend to like. So those are some tips for writing great headlines. Couple of examples of headlines to get you, inspired. And this is by no means like the only way that good headlines can look, but a couple of examples. I just wrote these up in a couple of minutes. The first is, our lead magnet, how to sign 2 to 4 coaching clients every month. So what I like about this is that it's very specific and very tangible and very benefit focused. Like if I'm a coach who wants clients, I'm like, wow, that's great. Like it's tangible. I want that. And also it's calling out the niche very specifically. The second one, 17 big weight loss mistakes women don't know they're making. So this is an example of like a open loop headline where it's like, when I read that, I'm like, hold on a second. Like, what are these mistakes that women don't know they're making? Like, I want to know if I'm a woman and I want to lose weight, like, what are those mistakes? Like, maybe I'm making one of them. Like, there's a sense of tension that creates, right? And so that's an example of a headline that evokes some emotion. It's curiosity based. It's got that kind of open loop in it. It's also calling out women specifically, weight loss. So we're targeting a very specific problem. How to double your corporate salary in 12 months or less. Again, example of a very tangible benefit focused headline, speaking to people who are working in corporate. So we're really calling out that person with the headline itself. Hey friend, hope you're enjoying this episode of the podcast. And before we get back to it, if you're an established online business owner who's serious about unlocking your next level of income and impact and growth in your business, I want you to watch my free $1 Million Online Business Training, where I walk through a 4-step roadmap I've personally used to sell well over $1 million of coaching, consulting, and courses online. It's going to make the journey of growing your business so much easier. I want to give this to you for free. All you got to do to access it is go to jasonmoss.com/growth. That's jasonmoss.com/GROWTH to get free access to this training right now. Now back to the episode. A couple of examples of headlines. And again, this is not the only way a headline might look, but if you go back to these principles that we talked about earlier, you'll be able to write really good headlines as long as you're checking these boxes. So your next action step is, and we're not going to do this right now, you can do this offline, is for each of those topics that you came up with, I want you to come up with 10 to 20 headlines. And you might say, Jason, that sounds like a lot of headlines. And I'm like, yeah, we would probably come up with way more. I do this for almost every YouTube video that we put out. Like, I spend a lot of time writing headlines. It's the first thing that I do whenever we create like a new YouTube video. The first thing that I figure out is what the headline is going to be. And so you could come up with like 10 different headlines, 20 different headlines, and you'll be amazed. Like one different headline could have like twice the number of people, 3 times the number of people who actually click on it. So this is worth spending some time on. So for each of those topics, I want you to come up with 10 to 20 headlines. And then you'll have like 50 headlines to choose from, like a crazy amount of headlines. And what I want you to do from there is I want you to take all those headlines and I want you to narrow them down and choose 3 to 5 that you think are the most attractive, and do what I call validating, which is really one thing that we can do is kind of like, okay, well, you might intuitively feel like you know which headline is going to be most effective, but we don't really know. The best way to figure this out is to actually test. And all of you have an audience on social media that you can use to actually help you figure this out. It's really great. Like a lot of people are like, well, why are you using this? Like, how did you come up with this 2 to 4 coaching clients thing? Or how did you nail that? The first thing, I'll be very honest with you, is I saw another business coach using it. And I was like, that's really good messaging. Like, I need to copy that. So originally it was inspired by some other business coach, but then I started using it. And when I was using it in my organic content, I noticed when I would like publish a video organically with that headline, or publish a post on social media, like a ton of people read it. It was like that headline was so attractive. And I started seeing that when I used that messaging organically on social media, a lot of people paid attention, a lot more people than normal. So it was a great way of validating that I had something there. And that was one of the reasons why this lead magnet that we've been using for the past, we're still using it today. I mean, the guide's been downloaded probably 20,000, 30,000 times at this point, at least. And it's been really effective, but it was effective because we did all that work on the front end and we had validated it. And I already knew that it was going to be an effective headline because I had tested it using my organic content first. So rather than just choosing a headline, what I want you to do is I want you to narrow it down to like your top 3 or your top 5. And I want you to put a post on social media, whatever platform you use. Almost every social media platform has like a polls feature. Like you can do, if you're on Instagram, you can do this in stories. If you're on LinkedIn, I believe there's a polls feature. Facebook has a polls feature that will basically allow you to just put in like 4 or 5 different options and people can actually vote on which they think is the best. And I want you to put something out and you just say like, hey, I'm working on something new for you guys. Curious, which of these is most attractive to you, or which of these, would you want to check out the most, or something like that. And just see what gets the most votes. And you'll see there's probably going to be one option that people select more than anyone else. And I love this. This is like market research. It's a way of skipping so much of the pain associated with putting something out there that, people just aren't going to be interested in. And it will allow you to come up with something right off the bat that, is going to be much more effective. One thing I do want to say is when it comes to doing this kind of stuff, it's important that you balance whatever feedback you get with your own intuition. Because sometimes the stuff that gets the most votes might not be the stuff that's going to attract the perfect, type of client. And so you can look at those headlines and say, okay, well, I see that like the numbers are showing me that this one's the right one, but I just feel like in my gut intuitively, this other headline's going to do a better job calling in the right people for me. So I'm going to go with that one. So it's not that we, go 100% by the numbers. I am more of a fan of balancing this with your intuition and using both things as a source of feedback for you when it comes to choosing the right headline for your lead magnet. All right, I'm going to check in with you guys. Any questions you have about anything that we've covered so far? Cool. This all makes sense in terms of a process. All right, awesome. Okay, so going through this process, starting with getting clear on your topics, then choosing those headlines, then narrowing down the headlines, and then doing that test on social media. And then finally from there, choosing one final headline that you're going to move forward with. You might think, Jason, this is overkill for a headline. And my response to you is going back to David Ogilvy's quote, when you've written your headline, you spend 80 cents of your ad dollar. So it makes sense to spend a lot of time here. And we really want to make sure that we get this piece right. Now, from there, once you've chosen whatever your headline actually is, the next question you probably have is, how do I actually create my lead magnet? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So a lot of people ask about software, like what do I use to do this? I don't want to, be super techie here. I don't have, a massive budget to be able to use on this. Personally, for me, like we did it super low tech. And if you look at our guide, and I'll show you our guide in a second, I used Canva for the cover, and I literally just designed the cover myself. Took me like, 20 minutes on Canva. And for those of you who have never used Canva, it's great. It's like a free online graphic design tool. And most of the functionality you don't have to pay for. And it can be, great for stuff like this. If you just want to design like a quick cover for a PDF guide or something like that. And I just wrote my guide in Google Docs, and then I just, pasted them together at the end. And that was what I did. It's super simple to do that way. You can get more advanced than that. You could hire somebody to help you like design something on Upwork. But I think honestly, when you're first starting with lead magnets, I think it's best to keep it simple and put together what we would call like a minimum viable product. Like what's the simplest, most bare bones, basic version of something that's not going to take me a ton of time to put together. And let me just get that out there first. And then if it's proving to be successful and people are downloading it and it's getting you clients, if you want to revamp it or make the design, more attractive down the line, you can always change it and update it at any point. But I think, starting with something like this is usually the best way to go. Now, in terms of structuring your lead magnet and what to put inside the lead magnet, again, there's not like a right or wrong here. And depending on how, what format you use, whether it's the guide or whether it's the checklist, obviously it's going to vary what the structure looks like. I'm going to recommend a guide, and using, if you've never written a guide before, or maybe you have, but you're kind of retooling your lead magnet, I'm going to recommend an approach that I think would be a great place to start if you're just looking for like a structure to follow. This is something that you can basically just kind of plug and play into your first lead magnet, and it will work very well. And this is what I call the method deep dive. For those of you who are here, who have watched my masterclass training, you'll also notice that this is a very similar approach that I recommend for masterclasses too. And this can also work well with masterclasses. And basically the method deep dive is where you give someone a high level overview of the method or the process you use to help your clients get from where they are today to where they want to be. So as an example, in my business, I help coaches get clients and launch and grow their businesses. And in order to do that, I have a 4-step process that I call the launch method that I take all of my clients through: niche, offer, audience, and enrollment. Those 4 steps are ultimately what I use to help clients, get clients and grow their coaching businesses. And so in my free guide, what I do is I basically walk people through those 4 steps. I say, look, if you want to sign 2 to 4 new coaching clients per month, these 4 steps are what you need to follow in order to make that happen. Now, the important thing is, in terms of sharing these steps, I'm not going into the weeds on how to do each of those steps. So it's not like a how-to guide in the sense that I'm telling them like exactly how to get clear on their niche and exactly how to build out their offer. What I do is I show them, here are the 4 steps. Here's why these steps are important. Here's what happens if you don't have these steps in place. And here are maybe some of the common mistakes that people make with each of these steps. And so I'm basically teaching them the what, but not the how. And this is, we talked earlier about like that balance between like giving people value, but also leaving them wanting more. This is one really great way to do it. Because if someone actually reads the guide, they go, okay, I can see that Jason's got a process, a method that really works. I'm connected to why this is important. I've got some clarity because I see that there are some clear steps to follow, and that really is helpful. But I also need help implementing these 4 steps. And so that creates a little bit of tension and a little bit of an open loop that is going to motivate someone to keep paying attention and also ultimately potentially apply to work with me. So this is one really great structure that I like. And if you've never created a lead magnet before, or if you're just looking for like more of a structure to follow, this is what I'm going to recommend for you guys to use for your guide. And what I want to do is I want to show you what this structure is and what this looks like. And probably the best thing to do is to actually just show you my lead magnet itself. So this is our lead magnet, client attraction guide for coaches, sign 2 to 4 new clients every single month. So this is literally something, this cover photo is something that I just designed in Canva. I just went onto Canva and searched for a template and just dropped in my brand photo and then changed the title, and that was good to go. You'll see the guide kicks off with this introduction section. And basically what I'm doing here, and there will be a slide in my slides when I switch back over in a second that kind of walks through an outline of this so you guys can copy this. But what I start with is I basically reflect back to my ideal client their desires and their challenges. So I start by saying like, hey, if you're reading this, I'm willing to bet that deep down inside you, there's a vision. Freedom, fulfillment, coaching full-time, transforming thousands of lives, living out your calling, doing work that matters, breaking free from a 9-to-5. And at the same time, if you're just getting started or in the early days of building the business that will allow you to make that all happen, sometimes it can feel like you just don't know where to start. Maybe you're a new coach who hasn't signed your first client yet. You've got lots of unanswered questions. And underneath that, there's a ceaseless chatter of your ego. Who am I to do this? I don't think I'm qualified enough. Why would anyone pay me? Do I really have what it takes? So what am I doing here? I'm starting with reflecting back to someone their experience and their life. We talk about how great messaging is a mirror, right? When you can reflect back to someone what they're going through. And this is one of the reasons why, you guys did market research and you know who your niche is, because now we can do this. You can reflect back to someone using language that mirrors their experience. This is what's going to get someone reading this and going, wow, this person's speaking to me. This person is like speaking my language. They're talking about my desires, the things that I want, the challenges that I have. And so we start by talking about that. And then from there, I kind of go into a little bit of my story. So, I know firsthand what it looks like and feels like when things haven't fully clicked, when you're trying to climb the mountain, right at the beginning stages, taking your first few steps, but feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or confused. That's why I created this free guide. This is the same roadmap I use to scale my own coaching business past multiple 6 figures. As I'm writing this, we're on track to make 60K this month, which literally blows my mind. So there's some credibility in there, showing people that I'm an expert who knows my stuff because I've been able to build this business myself. And then if we go on here, we kind of talk about more credibility. I've seen this 4-step roadmap work for all these coaches like Kimberly or Ariel or Karuna. So I'm sharing some success stories. So I'm building some credibility here. And you guys will have a copy of this guide as well. So you can go through this and kind of model this. But what I'm doing is I'm starting with empathy, right? Connecting with them about their own journey and what they're going through. And then from there, I'm basically introducing myself, my own credibility, and also this method, this 4-step method that I talk about. And then from there, I go into each of those steps of the method. So I introduce, my launch method, which is these 4 steps: niche, offer, audience, and enrollment. And then I go into, step 1, figure out what your niche is. And then in step 1, I talk about, why is this so important? Why is it important to have a clear niche? And why is it important to figure this out? And if you don't have this figured out, what are all the problems you're going to experience? This is one of my favorite ways to sell, by the way. When you're selling something to someone, like sell them on why it's important by talking about all the benefits that they're going to experience when they have something in place, and all the cost or the challenges that are going to happen if they don't have something in place. That's a really great way to sell. It's a really great framework. You just talk about those 2 things, and you can do that with anything. It's like if you're selling, on someone like coming to go out to dinner with you. It's like, oh, it's going to be so much fun, and we're going to have a great time, and you're going to have so much fun, and we're going to eat this amazing food. And, on the flip side, like, I know you were talking about like feeling kind of lonely lately. And like, if you stay in tonight, you're probably going to feel like kind of depressed, and you're going to feel like, maybe you spend like 4 hours watching Netflix and you feel like a little bit of like a failure at the end of the night. What are we doing? We're talking about the benefits of going out and the drawbacks of staying in. So this is what I'm doing for each of these steps. I'm basically selling people on each step. I'm like, hey, here's why figuring out your niche is important. And here's what happens if you don't have that in place. And then I talk about some common mistakes that people make for that step. So mistake number 1, trying to appeal to everyone. This is a common mistake that people make when it comes to dialing in their niche. So for each of these 4 steps, I'm basically doing that. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. And I follow the same format for each of those 4 steps. I talk about why that step is important, what's going to happen if they have that step dialed in, what happens if they don't have the step dialed in, and then maybe like 3 common mistakes that people are making, coaches often make in each of those steps. And that takes us through to the end of the guide. And then at the end, I have a quick recap, like here's the 4 steps again. And then we end with an invitation. Like, okay, so at this point, you might be asking how do I take this 4-step roadmap and apply it? Well, here's 2 places you can go next. Number 1, you can watch this free training. Or number 2, you can join our free Facebook group. So those are 2 invitations that I've made at the end of this guide. So that's an example of a format for your lead magnet that you can follow. And again, if we had to look at this on a high level, this is basically the format. And you guys will have a copy of this for those of you who are here live. I will upload this in the portal, so you can basically use this as a structure when you're creating your own lead magnet. And you will also have a copy. I will include a copy of my lead magnet. So you can basically go through that and you can use that as a model and copy that. Again, this is not the only format for and structure for a lead magnet, but if you are just getting started, maybe you haven't created a lot of lead magnets before, I think this is a structure that you can follow that is going to be successful for you. So this is basically the format and the structure for the method deep dive, which is one way that you can build out your lead magnet. And hopefully this will give you a little bit of a scaffolding to work with when you're building out your lead magnets. Anybody have any questions about this? Okay, cool. So, one thing I do want to talk about before we close things out today is invitations. So the invitation again is that piece at the end of the guide where we talk about, okay, here's what to do next. Like, go watch my free training or go join my Facebook group. One question you might have is, well, what should I invite people to? Like, what is an appropriate invitation for a lead magnet? The most important thing I want you to remember about making invitations and lead magnets is that the people that you're making those invitations to are still super cold. So they've literally clicked an ad of yours. They have no idea who you are. And they've put in their email address and downloaded your lead magnet. And maybe, they spent like 3 minutes reading it. So in my opinion, getting that person on a sales call or inviting them to submit an application, it's way too early. And if you do that, you're going to get a lot of people to book calls and submit applications. And you're going to spend a lot of time talking to people who have no idea who you are and who aren't sold on you. And it's going to be a nightmare. And you're going to, be pulling out your hair. You're going to look like me at the end of the day. You'll be like, oh my God, Jason, I have so many sales calls and I have like a 5% close rate. It's terrible. So we don't want to do that. I think it's better to play more of the long game in terms of these invitations and invite someone to a next step that's more of like I think of it like a pitch for a second date. It's like, what would be appropriate for a second date? It's like, we want to maybe provide a deeper opportunity for someone to connect with you. That's more of like a next step that maybe requires a little bit more of a commitment versus, something that's like jumping to the finish line. Like in my guide, we pitch a recording of like a masterclass that I ran. And I think it's like an hour and a half or something like that. And at the end of that masterclass, there's a pitch to book a call with me. So I know that I'm only going to get on the phone with people who have already seen an hour and a half of my training. That's someone that I'm okay with talking to. Like someone who's already gotten all the way through that. And they're like, I still want to work with you, Jason. Okay. Like I'm cool having a sales call with that person, but not the person who literally has never seen anything from me other than like a little lightweight, 15-page guide. So masterclasses, like recordings for trainings can work really well as like a next step invitation. Maybe your Facebook group, even like a low ticket offer. If you have like maybe a $47 recorded training or something like that, something that's evergreen that you could just like stick as a link in there. Maybe a YouTube channel, something like that, where someone maybe can get to know you a little bit more. That's something that I would say is a good, invitation. And I just would recommend like not inviting people to like book a call with you or submit an application. And this also goes, we'll talk about this a little bit later on when we talk about building your email sequence out, but this also applies for your emails, like the first few emails that you send to people. Like we don't really want to be talking about working with you like super early on in the process. We want to warm people up. So that is my approach for making invitations. And if you just think of it like you're taking somebody by the hand and walking them through the process of basically getting to know you, and you imagine like how would this look if I were meeting someone in person? And what are the dynamics that I would follow? Like that's a pretty good guideline and a good like principle for how to structure things online. It's the same as how you would do this if you were in person. And just remembering that and thinking of marketing that way, I think is a great shorthand to help you make better decisions in terms of how you're setting up your marketing. Because I see a lot of people who kind of just disregard that. And, we probably have all been in marketing funnels and things like that, where it's like you sign up for something and then you're just getting like blasted with like a sales pitch, like on like day one. And it just never really landed for me. It's like, I don't even really know you yet. Like, I don't want to be sold to yet. I kind of want to like get to know you a little bit more before you start pitching me. So that's my philosophy for that. And just remember, as you're building out your lead magnet, your first lead magnet is not going to be your last one. So we don't have to make this perfect. This is just like, we're going to start with something. And the nice thing about these lead magnets is you can always improve them over time. So I've updated mine a couple of times, revamped things. And you can always tweak this. It's actually super easy to do. So you don't have to worry about this being like set in stone. What I want you to focus on is just getting something like good enough for this first round, that we can move forward with it and actually, put it out there.